This is Nasha Kasha, Ukrainian Almanac. 28 minutes of stories for everyone about Ukrainian life. Nasha Kasha is heard on 19 campus and community radio stations from Newfoundland to British Columbia. This is episode 211. Both weather and political forecasters predict that the summer of 2020 will be hot. Black Lives Matter protests swell. COVID-19 concerns swirl. The broad range of opinions you are about to hear were recorded between June 5th and June 10th. Everyone participated to help the rest of us understand what they feel today and what they see for tomorrow. You will hear an attorney in Chicago, a documentary producer in California, a dentist in New Mexico, a corporate lawyer in New York, an HVAC energy solutions company owner in Florida. But we begin with a lawyer who has worked for 30 years for the U.S. federal government. Retired now, she lives where on May 25th, the killing of a black man in police custody after he allegedly tried to pass a counterfeit $20 bill has shaken an entire country.
Hello, my name is Daria Steck, and I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's an interesting and a very scary time. You look outdoors and everything looks normal. It's a beautiful spring, the flowers are blooming, the leaves on the trees are that beautiful light lime green color that cannot be replicated outside of nature. But this spring is like no other, nothing that I ever remember. It is a very scary time. At the end of February, we learned about the novel coronavirus pandemic, which is affecting the entire world. People have been affected so many different ways in their health, economically, educationally. Nobody has been spared. For me personally, I decided to go and stay with my 87 and 92-year-old parents at their house so that we could help each other and so that I would not risk bringing any germs from my apartment building, which has over 100 units. Because of our ages and the usual medical conditions the elderly have, we have been staying at home, having our groceries and other necessities delivered. In this beautiful weather, we do try to go outside every day to sit in the yard or, to take walks in the neighborhood. We talk to family and friends on Zoom. I keep thinking how I will never again take for granted just a simple phone call to a friend asking to meet at a local restaurant for breakfast or a hamburger, or even going downtown to run errands, which I normally wasn't that crazy about. And this epidemic is still going on. We have no idea how and when it'll end. On top of this health and economic crisis, we were hit with yet another crisis. This was, 10 days ago? The videotaped killing of a black man named George Floyd by a white police officer. I'm sure most people have seen the video and heard about the horrific nature of that killing, so I won't go into that again. But this happened in my city, in Minneapolis. It has affected the entire country and the world. Here in Minneapolis, what started as peaceful protests turned into violence, looting, the burning down of many properties, lots of them businesses, small businesses owned by minorities. The damage has been great. The worst of the violence was about 3 to 4 miles away from us, but there was looting and property destruction as close as 8 blocks away. I remember one particularly violent night when a police station was burned down. It was a beautiful night outside. We had windows open, but started smelling smoke in the house, very strong smell of smoke. So we closed the windows, but still continued to hear the ongoing sounds of sirens and the distinctive sounds of helicopters patrolling overhead. To me, it was like being in a war zone, or what I imagined to be a war zone, since I'd never really been in one. Luckily, things have calmed down, and now the protests, at least in Minneapolis, are peaceful and respectful. Spending all this time in isolation has given me a lot of time to think. I've come to the conclusion that the U.S. is at a crossroads and in grave danger. First, many of our institutions are broken and are not prepared for expected but unusual events. Healthcare, economic opportunity, and justice are handed out unevenly. These need to be fixed. Secondly, our current government and leaders have failed the people. We don't have a national leader to calm people, to give them facts, and to assist the citizenry at a time when leadership is needed most. We all have to dig deep and hard into our consciences before the upcoming November elections. And finally, I think we all as individuals will hopefully take away some positive changes once these trying times pass. While it'll be wonderful to get back out to churches, restaurants, concerts, and so on, I hope that we all remember that quiet, peaceful times with family and friends and with our own thoughts are valuable too. In closing, I wanted to read a quote by the late great Vice President of the United States and Senator from Minnesota, Hubert Humphrey. I think this quote is very apt for these times, and it is as follows. The moral test of government is how that government treats those who are in the dawn of life, the children, those who are in the twilight of life, the elderly, those who are in the shadows of life, the sick, the needy, and the handicapped. End of quote. By this measure, I believe the United States and its current government has a lot of work to do. Thank you very much.
This is Evan Wish playing his own composition, What Will Man's Legacy Be?
Hello, my name is Walter Michael Kolosiewski. I live in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I'd like to share some of my thoughts with you this time. All of us are sitting at home, self-quarantined, because we're trying to stop a bogus pandemic, and also watching these obviously orchestrated riots, and we're powerless to stop any of it. And of course, we're shocked to find out that all of the rioters and arsonists that were arrested in New York City were immediately set free because of the Democratic-sponsored and passed law, which is the bail reform law. You can look that up on Google. So that no matter how serious the crime, they were released to go back on the street and commit more crimes. This is just insane. Now the new cry by the global socialist Democrats is to defund the police altogether. Just get rid of them. Just how much of this insanity are the American people supposed to put up with before the Democratic Party is declared a terrorist organization? And an attempted coup against the sitting president using illegal FISA warrants to spy on him, knowing full well that the charges were false, but lying on TV and cable every day for more than 3 years, calling him a Russian agent. But there's no punishment. There's no excuse for this kind of insanity. There must be consequences for elected officials and TV networks for misleading and propagandizing and outright lying to the American people in order to stampede us into a world government. Those that commit treason, sedition, attempt revolution, and endanger the American people must be punished. Thank you and good night.
Сторінками ловить протяг вчорашня газета, а на фото збитий потяг і підпалена ракета. То моя планета, то моя планета. Тут на білому папері літери чорніють, надруковані химери думку розігріють про мою планету.
The band Fleet sing Moja Planeta, My Planet.
Про мою планету.
In his commentary, Walter Kolosiewski referred to FISA. FISA stands for Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1978. The FISA court oversees requests for surveillance against foreign spies inside the United States.
This is Yuri Sivo. I usually live in Los Angeles. I'm now sequestered during the pandemic lockdown on a family farm in the north central valley of California, where I'm at this first week of June. I'm outraged. No, strike that. I'm furious at what's happening now in America. Besides the double whammy of the total abdication of any pandemic response and the growing crisis in health, then there's the resulting economic freefall. Now people are protesting the horrible George Floyd killing. Now I'm seeing America flirting with authoritarianism. I never thought it would happen here. And I'm disturbed and sad because this is not the country my parents came to after World War II. They came as refugees. My father came from a village in eastern Ukraine where his uncles were sent off to gulags and his father was murdered by the NKVD. Then he was captured by the Nazis. My mother came from a village in western Ukraine, and she and her family tried to flee the Nazis, but they were captured, and they spent the last 11 months of World War II in Buchenwald camp, where they starved and worked as slave labor for the Nazis. They were rescued by American soldiers who came by in jeeps. Yep, that's what I grew up with. I definitely got a good dose of what authoritarian is, so I don't use that word lightly. I hate to say I have to use it now, here in America. My parents came to this country because America saved them. It gave them shelter. It gave them a second chance and start all over in a strange country. But they did it, and they always thanked America for it. But I wonder what they would say today. Mean to sound too dark. Maybe it's my responsibility as a Ukrainian American, child of the Holocaust survivors, to step forward and speak. I think the seeds of change are in our blood. Just look at what happened in 2014 during the Maidan Revolution. Ukrainians who were fed up of having a authoritarian, pro-Putin president, they took to the streets, very angry, and just cried for justice. Men, women, children, elderly came. And believe it or not, we overthrew an authoritarian regime. Identifying injustice, corruption, and calling it out and taking a stand, it's in our blood. So I know we're going to endure a long, hot, very angry summer, and I think many things are going to be changing very quickly, and we will not understand it. But hopefully by the November election, enough Americans and immigrants who have come to America will realize what America used to be. It's the America that my parents believed in, that shining example of democracy. Let's get back to that.
You're listening to the Ukrainian Bandurist Chorus.
This is Marta Farion, and I'm in Chicago. I can tell you what is happening in Chicago and in our Ukrainian village. Over a week ago, after a horrific killing of an African-American man by police in Minneapolis, we couldn't stand to look at it, and they replayed it and replayed it. It was awful. Well, there was a spontaneous protest of thousands of people all over the country, probably millions, both blacks and whites, and people of all ethnic backgrounds went to protest. And in Chicago, thousands also gathered. So in parks and on busy streets and throngs of people marching to our downtown, the center of our city, what happened is exactly what happens most of the time with revolutions, that along with the legitimate protesters who are peaceful, there are groups that want to hijack a good cause and use the protest to destroy property, to drive around looting and stealing, and also defacing property along the way. So last weekend, there was a lot of looting and breaking store windows in specific areas of the city. After the weekend, things calmed down and legitimate protesters continued their peaceful protests. And they have a right to do so. And they preserved the message of the protest, which means demands for police reforms and attention to systematic discrimination that pervades society and so many other things that are unfair. The press likes to show scenes of violence because those scenes are more exciting and more dramatic. So last weekend, these looting and violent incidents overtook the message of the protests and the real situation. But believe me, most of the protests that took place last weekend and all week, including this week, all these protests are totally peaceful. So Ukrainian Village is situated very close to the center of the city, to our downtown, and it became a logical target for looters after the city closed off all the streets in the center of the city. They also raised all the bridges so that people wouldn't be able to drive through on the other side of the river. So it was a mess. What can I tell you? We couldn't get to anywhere. So we did get a few bands of young looters and troublemakers who smashed some store windows. They went after 4 markets that sell liquor, 2 stores that sell cell phones, and an ATM machine. This, I'm talking about Ukrainian Village. Many stores and establishments located on the main street of our neighborhood, boarded up as a precaution, but they were not damaged. Nobody was injured, and by Monday and Tuesday, people were out on the street and going to the supermarkets, taking their kids on walks and walking their dogs. So things were back to normal. Ukrainian Village is really a hot neighborhood now. There are new residential and commercial buildings, and the value of property skyrocketed. And this is a neighborhood where mostly white people live, not only Ukrainians. We have people from everywhere. And we have many neighbors who are Latinos and African Americans too. Across from the Ukrainian Cultural Center and the Ukrainian Church, there is a bar restaurant owned by African Americans, and it's called Mr. Brown's, and I recommend going there. They have delicious food. And on the next block, there is a hair salon who is also owned by African Americans. And Ukrainians frequent these businesses, and we have had no racial issues with the businesses and with our neighbors. I'm not trying to paint an ideal picture of love thy neighbor and kumbaya, but we have not had a racial problem in the neighborhood in many, many years. The looting that took place last week was by young, restless people from other parts of the city who drove in and out. These are the problem kids. They are lost without guidance in life. But this is a totally different problem of urban America. Now, I have no doubt that a lot of the violent situations were caused intentionally by third parties who came to provoke these young, angry folks. By the way, the looters were both blacks and whites. How do you explain the Russian bikers in Brooklyn on videos encouraging crowds to fight, or white men yelling to the young kids to go and smash windows? Something is happening. Somebody's provoking all of this. For now, things calmed down in Chicago, and our mayor, Lori Lightfoot, is African American, and she is a strong leader, and she managed to calm people down and keep order. But we are living in a hell of a year, 2020. I'm convinced that this year will be followed by major changes in the way we interact with each other, the way we go shopping, the way we work, the way we deal with problems. This is a tough year. We have to deal with the coronavirus pandemic, and after all the large crowds on the streets, there is bound to be a resurgence of COVID cases. We are dealing with major unemployment, with an economic recession, with fear of the unknown, with a lot of stress, and all this is happening during a presidential campaign and the November elections. And all of this has an effect on the Ukrainian American community as well. All I can say, my dear friends, I wish I lived in Canada right now. I have faith that this too shall pass, hopefully soon. We need to relax a bit here in the States, listen to music, interact with friends, and appreciate family, because we need to make it through this crazy time. And like they say in Ukraine, все буде добре. You are lucky to be living in Canada. All the best to you.
Tonight I'm solidly sitting at home. There's no one else inside, nobody comes, nobody phones. Despite late at night, I can get no sleep. Caught in a big, big world. I feel that I am alone. Oh yeah, tonight I'm alone. Say tonight I'm alone. I am alone. Alright. I am living in a big, big town. My place is situated in a big block of flats. But actually in a big town there's not much love. And sometimes running into the only bed that one can get. Oh yeah, tonight I'm alone. Say tonight I'm alone. I'm alone. I'm alone. I'm alone.
The song Tonight I'm Alone, Vadim Krasnooki and the Madheads.
Hello, this is Marco Farion, and I'm speaking to you from Artesia, New Mexico. I am a bandurist, an opera singer, and a dentist. So during this COVID shutdown, the economic impact was bad, and to me worrisome was I had to see emergency patients throughout the shutdown, but the whole issue of finding all the PPE I needed that was necessary for protection was very difficult to find, and some of the items that were found, these companies were price gouging as far as I'm concerned. But on the other hand, I was able to spend time with my family, my children. Kids were off school, and so we were able to spend some quality time together, which was fantastic. And the other thing, since I am a bandurist, I was able to work on some repertoire. I mean, I couldn't perform, but throughout the shutdown, I released certain videos either on Instagram or on my YouTube channel. And as far as politics are politics. You know, it's all cyclical. There's the far left, the far right, things that are going on. To me, family is first, and then my music comes next. You know, politics is politics. You know, things happen. It's not the end of the world. And as a whole, I think most people are in the center, and most people are agreeable. Most people want to get along, and I have faith in all people to come together with a common thought and a common goal. For us Ukrainians, it's to think about the impact of Ukraine. Let not the world forget that Putin and Russia, they are invading Ukraine, so we need to keep that on the forefront of people's minds. Все решта буде.
This is Marco Farion playing the bandura. The melody, Echoes of the Steppes, Homin Stepiu. It was composed by his teacher, the late Grigori Kitasti.
Hi, my name is Marko Simotyuk, and I live in New York City. In late March, I was supposed to go to Mexico for a wedding. The weekend beforehand, I remember watching the news and seeing how there were lines of people in JFK in immigration waiting to get back into the country, but they weren't able to because of COVID. Ultimately, the wedding was canceled, and as things got worse, my fiance and I decided to drive up to upstate New York near Minneapolis State Park and rent a house very near Soyezuka Ukrainian Heritage Center to see how things would evolve. Things got bad, but thankfully things did not pan out to be the worst case scenario. And so in April, we decided to return to New York City because we had sold our property in Manhattan and were moving to Brooklyn. While we left a bustling metropolis, we came back to a almost quiet village. at least in New York, we came back to was like New York on Christmas or Thanksgiving, when everybody's out of Manhattan visiting their families, and it's a bit of a ghost town. Things stayed like that for a while, and then as the weather got better and things with COVID also got better, people slowly started to come back, although it never really got back to where it used to be. Ultimately, we moved from Manhattan to Brooklyn. Things settled down a bit. The city started to get back to normal. Life started to seem like it was going to go on. And then, all of a sudden, the protests broke out. I remember moving into the new building, being very excited, going out for coffee one day, and then walking up to Bedford Avenue, which is a main street in Brooklyn, and seeing a protest of Black Lives Matter protesters walking to McCarran Park. It's just surreal how quickly things changed from social distancing to social justice, and it's a good change. It's great to see that people are being this active. Now, I wouldn't be telling the truth if I wasn't scared the first night that the protests started. Mayor de Blasio called for a curfew at 11 p.m. on the very first night of curfews. It was Monday, and unfortunately, I got stuck working until about 2 in the morning on a deal that was closing the next day. And I just remember watching Twitter and seeing people tweet about the protests that were happening. As the night wore on, the tweets were becoming more and more severe. It started with people breaking into a store somewhere in Manhattan, and then it grew to another store, and then all of a sudden it was the Macy's in Herald Square. And I just could not believe that this was the city that I was living in, places that I visited on a regular basis. In any event, it seems like things have grown quieter as the protests have become more peaceful, but almost more purposeful at the same time. There's still a lot of uncertainty over the summer with the elections and whether there'll be a second wave, but I'm hopeful that things will continue to get better.
I'd like to gratefully acknowledge that Nasha Kasha is supported in part by the Shevchenko Foundation and the Ukrainian Credit Union. Back in a week, God willing. До милої зустрічі за тиждень часу. Дорогі слухачі.